We're all college football fans on this channel, right? And we all have our favorite team. And for most of us, that's what attracted us to college football in the beginning. That love of our team, whoever that team happens to be for you, right? Rooting your team on to victory on a Saturday in the fall. Suffering with your team after a heartbreaking defeat. These are the memories we've accumulated over the life of our fandom that have given us an emotional attachment to college football and to our team. But there's other things about college football that we've all come to love too, right? That don't necessarily involve your own team. Who doesn't love a huge upset, right? As long as it's not your team that's getting beat. Ask any college football fan about App State and what will they tell you? Michigan, 2007. We love upsets. You know what else I love about college football? Stories, great stories that don't necessarily have to do directly with a football game. Kyle Trask, I'll use as an example. I hate Florida because I have to. I'm a Georgia fan. The Kyle Trask story is a great story. Here's a kid that played football growing up all the way up through 8th grade in middle school, was pretty good, went to a high school that just happened to have an amazing quarterback ahead of him on the depth chart. He sat on the bench for 4 straight years in high school, still managed to get a scholarship to Florida. Gets to Florida, rides the bench there for a couple of years. Felipe Franks gets hurt in last year's Kentucky game. In comes Kyle Trask and leads Florida back to an amazing come-from-behind victory over Kentucky that nobody saw coming, and went on to lead the Gators to a pretty successful season, finishing in the top 10 with a New Year's Six bowl win. It was a great story. I got no love for the Florida Gators, but that's a great story. And there's dozens of stories like that in college football every single year. Those are the kinds of things that attracts us to college football. You know what else I love about college football? Surprise teams. That's right. Every single year, we can probably sit down. I could probably take any 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 college football fans and come up with a list of 6 or 7 teams, 8 teams, 7, 8 teams that we all agree probably are top 10 type teams. But it seems like every single year there's a team or two that quote unquote comes out of nowhere, right? Maybe they don't go on to win a national title, but they were terrible last year. No one talked about them during the offseason. And all of a sudden you look up halfway through the season and they're 4-0, 5-0, 6-1, something like that. Minnesota from last year is a good example of a team like this. When was the last time Minnesota won 10 plus games? I think you got to go back to the 1930s or 40s. And they end up winning 11 games last year after their bowl win over Auburn. A real surprise team, Minnesota. And who rooted against Minnesota last year? Nobody. You wanted to see them do well unless they were playing your team. I think there's a few teams in 2020 that could fit that category as surprise teams. Teams that weren't all that great last year, didn't win divisions or conferences or major bowl games last year. Not a lot of people talking about them this offseason. Not very many people picking these teams to win their conference this year, but teams that I think have potential to show great improvement, drastic improvement over what we saw last year. I'm going to give you a couple of teams from each Power 5 conference that I think could be this year's surprise team, and I'm going to do it right now. All right, I'm going to run through the Power 5 conferences in alphabetical order. I'm going to list 2 or 3 teams that I think have potential to be a surprise team. Then I'm going to tell you who I actually think will be the surprise team and maybe who will be the best team of the group that I mentioned too. Let's start with the ACC. It's really Clemson and everybody else in the ACC. I'd be surprised, honestly, if anybody other than Clemson won the ACC, but that's not really the point. I've got 3 teams here that hovered around 500 last year. And I think could take big steps forward in 2020. Let's start with sort of the obvious. This is a team that people are talking about this offseason. This is not an under-the-radar team. This team is almost everyone's pick as a surprise or a dark horse type team, the University of North Carolina. Mac Brown came back last year after being at North Carolina for a bunch of years a long time ago, went to Texas, then hid in the broadcast booth for a while, now back on Chapel Hill. And while they didn't have a great season overall last year, they were so bad when he got there, people were surprised at how good they looked, particularly a couple of key games in the season. They had freshman quarterback Sam Howell, who played great. He comes back. So the expectations have sort of been raised for North Carolina year 2, but they were 6-6 last year, 7-6 after a bowl win. Could they be the surprise team this year out of the ACC? What about Louisville? Louisville is a team that people have forgotten about since Lamar Jackson left. It's crazy when you think about how good Lamar Jackson made Louisville, because once he left, they completely fell off the map. And they were never really able to even get over the hump with Lamar Jackson. They had that great sort of all-time classic game against Clemson, Lamar Jackson's last year, a back-and-forth game in Death Valley. Clemson won it at the end. That was sort of the peak of the Louisville program under Lamar Jackson. Last year, they were 6-6, finished 6-7 after, they were 7-5, finished 8-5 after a bowl win. So appear to be heading in the right direction, at least trajectory-wise. They've got a new coaching staff in there that took over last year. Maybe they're a surprise team to keep an eye on in 2020. And my third team I want to talk about at the ACC, the Miami Hurricanes. And I know I've given Miami Hurricanes and their fans a lot of grief on this channel, but let's be real, they've deserved it. They were 6-6 last year, 6-7 after a humiliating bowl loss to Louisiana Tech, where they didn't even score a single point. So 6-6, a 6-win team. Now, which of these three teams would you consider a possible surprise team for 2020? Sort of the criteria that I look at here. In order to be a surprise, you got to win at least 3 more games, I think, than you won last year. So in the case of North Carolina and Miami, they each won 6 games. Which one of those two teams could get to 9 wins? In the case of Louisville, they were 7-5, 8-5 after a bowl win. We'll forget the bowl records for now and just focus on the regular season. 7-5. Could they get to 10 wins? I don't know. Here's the other thing. All these schedules have changed and are up in the air. So when I mention a team winning 10 games, I'm talking about under normal circumstances with a 12-game schedule. The point is, who do you think could be the biggest surprise out of these 3 in the ACC? I might surprise you here a little bit. I'm going to go with Miami. I think Miami could be the surprise team out of the ACC this year. North Carolina's getting a lot of hype and a lot of love in the offseason. Miami's not getting nearly the attention that North Carolina is. And I think Miami is way more talented than North Carolina. In fact, I don't even think it's that close. I know North Carolina's putting together a really good recruiting class for this coming year, and they did okay in the recruiting class that ended this past February, but top to bottom, they do not have the talent that Miami has. Miami's weakness, in my mind, has been consistency at the head coaching position. They've had a hard time finding a guy they can keep for more than 3 years, and quarterback play. I think they solved the quarterback issue by bringing De'Aaron King in to start for them this year, to grad transfer from Houston. If he can play consistent, limit his turnovers, and give them some big plays with his feet, I think Miami could be dangerous in the ACC this year. I think they could potentially be the second best team in the ACC. I know North Carolina is the hot pick, and North Carolina fan loves to tell you that we almost won 9 games. 4 of our losses were by 7 points or less or whatever. Yeah, 4 of your wins were by about 7 points or less too. I do think North Carolina will be a good team, but to be a surprise team, you sort of got to come out of nowhere. Way too many people talking about North Carolina, so that sort of eliminates them. I'm going to go with Miami as the surprise team out of the ACC for 2020. I think they could win that division and face Clemson in the ACC title game. Now, what about the Big Ten? Now, the Big Ten had some pretty bad teams last year. Rutgers, one of the worst teams in America year after year for the last decade or so. Maryland, 3-9. Purdue, 4-8. Nebraska, 5-7. I'm going to pick 3 teams that could surprise you here. Maryland, Purdue, and Nebraska. Maryland was 3-9 last year. Do you guys remember the first couple of weeks of last season? Maryland beat somebody. Was it like 70-0 or something? They beat some people like, holy moly, where'd this offense come from? Then it went like an entire month and couldn't score a point. I like Maryland in 2020, and I like them even more in 2021. That's not the point of this video, though, but they're doing some things with recruiting. They've got some guys to come in at key positions up there that I didn't think they had a chance to get, and of course, they got Tua's younger brother to transfer there from Alabama, which will help them next year, too. But starting out with 3 wins, it's pretty easy, I think, for Maryland to win 3 more games than they lost last year. They only would have to get to 6 wins. 3-9 last year. I like their coaching staff, and like I said, are they loaded top to bottom like in Ohio State? Clearly, no. But they've got some big-time recruits at key positions. I think Maryland is a potential for a surprise team. Purdue, 4-8. They've got one of the most exciting players in all of college football on their team in Rondale Moore. He was hurt week 1 last year and didn't play the rest of the season. Guy's a home run hitter. He's absolutely unbelievable. If you remember the Ohio State game from a couple of years ago where Purdue had like 1,000 yards, I think 800 of those were from Rondale Moore. I'm exaggerating, but you get the point. He went down week 1. Purdue still threw for more yards than anyone else in the Big Ten. Didn't they throw for 5,000 yards or something? It was just a ridiculous amount. With him back this year, I think Purdue could substantially increase their win total from the 4 wins they had last year. And then Nebraska, I got to be honest, I can't buy in on Nebraska anymore. I way overhyped them last year, and I just can't be made to look a fool for 2 years in a row. They were 5-7 in a year when, honestly, when you look at their schedule, they should have won 8, maybe 9 games last year and been a threat to win their division. Instead, they couldn't even make a bowl game. I do think they'll improve a little bit year 3 under Scott Frost. I don't think they'll improve as much as Maryland or even Purdue. I think Maryland will be the biggest surprise team in the Big Ten in 2020. On to the Big 12, Oklahoma and everyone else, right? Here's 3 candidates in the Big 12 that could be the surprise team for 2020. Oklahoma State, TCU, and Texas. That's right. Now, let's start with Texas. They're back every single offseason. We know that. The question is, are they back to losing 5 games like they tend to do almost every single year for the last decade, or are they back to winning 10-plus games competing for the Big 12 in a playoff spot? I'm going to say somewhere in the middle for 2020. I don't think they're competing for the playoffs. They're also not losing 5 games. They will be improved over what they were in 2019. How much? Can they go from 7-5 to 10-2? Maybe. TCU, 5-7 last year, missed a bowl game. Gary Patterson, head coach, been there forever. One of the only coaches in the Big 12 that seems to try at least every single year to play any kind of defense. They, of course, have a couple of 5-stars that they got, most notably Zach Evans, running back. Everybody in America wanted him. He had some issues in high school, sort of interfered with his recruitment a little bit. He signed late with TCU. He'll be there this year as a true freshman, 5-7. You start out with a losing record, hardly anywhere to go but up. They could be an improved team in 2020. And Oklahoma State, 8-4 last year, 8-5 after a bowl loss. But 8-4. Probably the best running back, right, in the Big 12, Chuba Hubbard. They've had some offseason issues that have worried me a little bit. I've talked about Oklahoma State quite a bit in the offseason and picked them as one of my surprise teams for 2020. As we get a little closer to the season, I'm starting to change my mind a little bit. Is it possible Oklahoma State wins more games than TCU in 2020? Yes, it's possible. But remember, they were 8-4. TCU was 5-7. So if Oklahoma State goes 9-3, but TCU goes 8-4, that's a 3-game improvement for TCU and only a 1-game improvement for Oklahoma State. So for the purposes of this video, biggest surprise in the Big 12, I'm going to say TCU. I think they could increase their win total to 8, maybe even 9 games under normal circumstances. Again, I know with the scheduling, talking normal circumstances here. 5-win team last year. TCU, my pick for the biggest surprise 2020 in the Big 12. Pac-12 Nation. Are we even going to have any Pac-12 football? They're threatening to go on strike out there. They form some kind of players alliance, players union, or whatever the hell. Who knows what's going on out there. 3 candidates for most improved in the Pac-12. Arizona State, Southern Cal, and Stanford. Let's start with Stanford. 4-8 last year. How's that possible? I don't know, but David Shaw found a way to do it. Stanford got away last year from what made them a 10-win team, what seems like every single year. I've called Stanford an SEC team on the West Coast for years, and last year, that's not what I saw. They almost completely abandoned the run game, went to a spread it out and throw it around type of offense, and it just didn't work. 4-8. But listen to their win totals going back to 2010. 12 wins, 11 wins, 12 wins, 11 wins, 8 wins, 12 wins, 10 wins, 9 wins, 9 wins. 10-plus wins all but 3 of those seasons. And those 3 were 8, 9, and 9. So this 4-8 season is by far the worst season they've had in a long, long time. 4-8. No way, in my opinion, Stanford goes anything close to 4-8 for a second year in a row. A strong contender for surprise team in the Pac-12. Let's look at Arizona State, another team I've spent a lot of time talking about in the offseason. They're one of my picks to surprise people in college football this year. They were 7-5 last year, 8-5 after a bowl win. And if you remember, they sort of ruined Oregon's season with that win against Oregon late in the season that kind of knocked Oregon out of playoff contention. Arizona State won their last 3 games. They were playing some of their best football at the end of the year. I think they could not only be a surprise team in 2020, but could potentially win their division and challenge Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. Third, Southern Cal, 8-4 last year, 8-5 after a bowl loss. Southern Cal might be the most talented team in the Pac-12. I've given Clay Helton a lot of hell. I'm not a Clay Helton fan. I think Southern Cal should have got rid of him after last year and did everything they could to go get Urban Meyer, but they didn't. They decided to keep Clay Helton. Will that pay off? We'll see. Slovis is going to be in his second year as a starting quarterback there. They're loaded at the skill positions at wide receiver. They need better defensive play. I do think Southern Cal is the most talented team in the Pac-12 South, but I'm going to go with Arizona State as the biggest surprise here. I think Arizona State does win the Pac-12 South in 2020. and will be my surprise team out of the Pac-12 in 2020. All right, last and not least, the SEC. It just means more. It just does. How about this for 3 potential candidates for biggest surprise out of the SEC? Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Mississippi State. Which one of those 3 teams will be the biggest surprise? Let's start with Ole Miss. 4-8 last year. Terrible. Got rid of their coaches. In comes Lane Kiffin. More on that in a minute. Texas A&M, 7-5 in the regular season last year. Won a bowl game to put them at 8-5. Texas A&M fan will tell you they're the best 5-loss team in history. And yeah, the 5 teams they lost to were all pretty good. Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, Auburn, and LSU. 5 top 15 teams. This just in. If you want to be a really good team, you got to beat some other really good teams. You can't lose to every ranked team you play and then say, well, we only lost to ranked teams, so we're still pretty good. No, you got to beat some of them. 7-5 in the regular season last year. Mississippi State, 6-6 in the regular season last year, 6-7 after a bowl loss. They too, wholesale changes at the coaching position. They bring in Bigfoot from Washington State, Mike Leach. Of these 3 teams, who could potentially be the biggest surprise in 2020? Who do you think the best team out of these 3 in 2020 is? I'm going to mix it up a little bit. I think the best team is Texas A&M. Of these 3, of Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, I think Texas A&M will have the best record in 2020. I think they will be the best team of the 3. I think Ole Miss will be the biggest surprise, though. Ole Miss was 4-8 last year. I would not be surprised to see Ole Miss flip-flop that, again, under normal scheduling conditions. I know they're not playing 12 games, but it's the only way to compare this apples to apples, okay? I would not be shocked to see Mississippi State win 7 or 8 games in 2020. Texas A&M, I think, could win 8 or 9 games, so technically they would still be a better team, but the bigger surprise, the bigger turnaround would be Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. He's got talent there. It's not like the cupboard is bare in Ole Miss. They've got 2 quarterbacks Lane Kiffin can work with. They've got some NFL wide receivers, and they were one of the best teams in the SEC at pressuring the quarterback last year on defense. I think Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss potentially is a dangerous situation for a lot of teams this year. I'm talking to you, Florida. Yeah. So, biggest surprise from the SEC, Ole Miss. There you go. I talked about 3 teams from each of the Power 5 conferences, and I told you which of those 3 teams I think would be the biggest surprise in 2020. Now, remember, I don't think any of these teams I talked about today are winning a national title this year. They're not even making a playoff this year. But these teams could surprise a lot of people. I wouldn't be surprised if all the teams I talked about in today's video, which 3 times 5, 15 teams I talked about, I wouldn't be surprised if all 15 of those teams beat somebody this year you're not expecting them to beat. These are all pretty good teams that I feel like are flying under the radar for 2020, and I wouldn't be shocked if any of those teams I mentioned found a way to get to 9 or 10 wins, again, under normal scheduling conditions. I know we're not having a normal season this year, but I think you guys are smart enough to figure out what I'm saying. Anyway, appreciate you guys watching. Have a good morning!